Welcome to Medical Sales U. I'm your host, Dave Sterrett. This is the podcast that is designed to help professionals across the board in all types of professions to break into medical sales in areas like specialty pharmaceuticals and oncology, but also medical device. And so if you're interested in our program, check us out at Medical Sales U. One of the reasons why people get into this industry initially, I hear it sometimes is, I'm not reaching my financial goals. And it is true that this industry can be lucrative. It's not a guarantee. There's a lot of hard work. But I think most important, we can't forget about what's most important, and that is the patient. That is why we do it. And I would say that if we're not concerned about the patient, if that's not what's at the forefront of our minds, we're going to struggle and you will fail at this industry. Today's guest, Dave Bjork, is an advocate for patients. He himself is a lung cancer survivor, and he's the host of an extraordinary podcast called The Research Evangelist. Dave, it is great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be here.
Dave, did I get your podcast correctly? Is that called the Research Evangelist?
That is correct. And the reason I was actually named the Research Evangelist by a friend of mine about 12 years ago. And he said, you are the Research Evangelist. And the Greek meaning of evangelist is bringing the good news. I like to think that I'm bringing the good news in lung cancer treatment and research by sharing stories of amazing people.
I love that. I love the title. Dave, can you take us back? Our audience is often wanting to get into medical sales, but I wanted to have you on. I've seen you. I've followed you a little bit on social media, but you're an intellectual. Even though you don't have the clinical background, you do your research. And you have a background, you graduated from the Wharton Business School, but can you tell us about your career a little bit leading up prior to getting cancer, and tell us that story. Can you take us back years ago when you found out you got lung cancer? If you could just take us back to the early days.
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting because I like to say I was just minding my own business, I was actually working at the Bank of Ireland, investment services, and it just kind of came out of nowhere. I was up in Maine with a friend at his camp up in Maine, and I got pneumonia. I got really, really sick, and I was playing hoops at the Y in the men's league every day at lunch down the road from where I lived, and I was 35 years old. It completely took me by surprise, and then I got pneumonia again. Then I got pneumonia 3 times within like 9 months, and my doctor didn't think to do a CAT scan because I didn't have a history of tobacco use or other risk factors that would make someone think that. And so so I got the phone call. I did get a CAT scan finally, and I got the phone call. Like everyone who has been touched by cancer knows what that means. David, Dr. Kaplan, you have to come see me. We found a tumor in your lung. You have lung cancer. And I was like, what? And so I think what it does is it just kind of takes your breath away. You just the world stops, everything, nothing's important. I had 3 kids out of the age of 6 at the time. And do I have enough insurance? It just started catastrophizing, reading all the stuff, the worst things, the worst outcome possible. But I had a lobectomy. They removed half of my left lung, and it was a really horrible experience. A week in the hospital on a morphine drip, and a long recovery time because it's broken ribs and all that. So it's a very invasive surgery. But I didn't have metastasis, and so I came out of that feeling gratitude and living every day since then a life of gratitude, because here I am. And as you know, Dave, because you're in the business, 25 years ago, there was not any treatments for lung cancer. There was chemotherapy, and it didn't last very long. And now look at it's amazing what's happening now. And so again, living a life of gratitude, being a research evangelist, bringing the good news. It's not always good news, but for a lot of people, it is good news. People are living longer, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
You know, what you mentioned is exactly true. Just the amount of innovation that's taken place recently. 25 years ago, there just wasn't a lot out there. My wife, when she was 4 years old, her mom, who was a non-smoker, got stage 4 lung cancer, and she died. And my wife was the youngest of 5 siblings. And, now, we have 3 kids. And now, as she's getting close to the age of her mom, there's that, the concern, and it affects families. Now, I had my side of the family, an uncle and my grandfather. I never knew my grandfather because he died of lung cancer, but he was an avid smoker too. And so I think, of course, smoking is the number one cause of lung cancer, but there's a lot driven in, different mutations genetically show up as well. And some patient populations who don't fit that exact profile. When you found out, do you remember what stage it was back then? Did they stage you? How far along? How bad was it?
It was, yeah. And I say with the deepest gratitude and respect, it was stage 1, and so, it was localized. They removed half of my lung, and that was it. So. As you know, Dave, when the younger or the earlier you find lung cancer, the better chances you have of survival. And so that's the problem with lung cancer, is that I think the majority of people who get diagnosed with lung cancer are at an advanced stage, because you don't have symptoms, you don't have, you don't think of it, right? Yeah. And so for me, if I got pneumonia, and so it was an indicator something was wrong, because I kept getting pneumonia in the same place.
Right.
And so clearly there was that finally they had to figure out there was a diagnosis. So again, life of gratitude because it was early stage, but nonetheless, I'm still here today, but that's part of what motivates me to continue to be an advocate for others.
How did you get involved as being an advocate and eventually lead to your podcast and the speaker? How did that happen?
It's interesting. When I came out, once I recovered, and I left the Bank of Ireland, and I was, a friend of mine said, you got to find, you should find something that you're passionate about. And this is what got me into healthcare. And so I said, well, I'm passionate about is like patient education, right? Because I grew up in Minnesota. I have relatives from rural parts of Minnesota, up on Iron Range in northern part of the state. And I think of those people, and I think of I got treated at Mass General Hospital in Boston. So I had excellent care. I had access to anything. I had good insurance. My wife's a nurse. And so how can I help others that might not have access to what I had access to? And that's what really kind of motivated me. So I got involved with patient education. But I didn't become an advocate right away, Dave. I think I had survivor's guilt kind of feelings, and I felt like my story's not interesting because I survived and I'm not fighting for my life. And I couldn't really find a place what's my lane? What's my place? Because I couldn't go on these online boards and add a voice of what side effects are you getting from your treatment? I was like, I couldn't really participate. And so research became what I was interested in, because I think we just talked about the advancements in innovation that are happening today happened because 20 years ago, there was innovation that was happening, right? You think of immunotherapy, like Jim Allison, right? Like Jim Allison 25 years ago, he was like this, wild guy from Texas, who was, had these ideas about, revving up your, immune system. And now everyone knows about it. So that really was an evolution of me finding my place. It was really about 12, 13 years ago when I got on Twitter. My friend said, Dave, start sharing your story.
Okay.
He named me the Evangelist. I went on Twitter. I started with 20 followers. Now I've got 4,000 followers. And they're all real people, right? And so I've really started making these connections, bridging connections. I think that was really important for me.
And then I guess pharmaceutical companies asked you to come and speak, right, to their employees. And how did that happen?
It's funny. I think because what I tell people about advocacy is that if you just be yourself, just be your authentic self and put yourself out there, start making connections, and then just be real, just be authentic, people find you. And people started to find me. So I would get contacted by people and they'd say, we're having, I gave a talk at the ASCO conference last year in Chicago to a pharma company, and they had 500 employees in town for a meeting, but prior to the start. And I was the keynote speaker. Well, they asked me to just share my story. And I'm like, well, my story's not that interesting. I'm like, no, your story is good. We want to hear your story. And so I think it was really because I kind of started putting myself out there and starting working with these companies. And by the way, I want to say to your audience that my podcast, I've had several people from pharma on my podcast. The reason is because we're all in this together. And I want to make this point. It's very important to me. I talk to researchers, I talk to oncologists, I talk to thoracic surgeons, I talk to nurse navigators, I talk to pharma leaders like Tyrone Brewer and others, Mark Wildgust at J&J, because they're we're all part of this. And it's a message that I try to send to people. I'm not going to debate anybody on drug prices and all this other stuff, but it's not big bad pharma to me. It's just not. And because that's what brings these innovations to patients, right?
Yeah.
It starts with someone in a laboratory, with an idea, right, at the bench, and then all the way through the ecosystem, it ends up where a pharma company helps bring that to patients.
And I would say also for my audience, there are those who are maybe in medical sales, but they really want to get into oncology. They've been affected by someone that they love who's gotten cancer. It might be breast cancer, it might be prostate cancer or lung cancer, but they want to get in. And it's hard for some. And I would say one of the things for that audience too is to download the Research Evangelist and to download your podcast and to follow you on Twitter. And because the people that you have on your show, a lot of them are thought leaders. They have been in the industry. They are innovators, both physicians, but also those from the commercial side with, leading divisions or whole companies. Maybe you could take us back a little bit to your podcast and just tell us when you first got started. Can you tell us about maybe some of the people that you interviewed and, all along, I've been doing this. There's bumps along the way. I started this back in April with my podcast, but what are some things that you learned? And tell us an interesting person that you interviewed on the Research Evangelist in the early days, and then we'll talk about some of the more recent ones.
It's really funny. In November of 2020, I left my full-time job. I said, I'm going to, people had encouraged me to do a podcast, and I had never done it before, so I didn't know much about how to do it. But they encouraged me, and I said, you know what, on a leap of faith, I'm just going to do it. And I'm not going to get paid. I don't get paid to do it. I just do it because I love to do it. And I said, well, who's going to be on my podcast? Who the heck is going to want to be on my show? And I had a couple of friends. I had a researcher at Mass General, John Wetstein, and I had Brendan Stiles, who was a friend of mine. He was a thoracic surgeon. He's now at Montefiore in New York City. And because he was a friend, he said, oh, Dave, I'm happy to do it. So he was my first guest. And then after that, I said, well, now who's going to be on my show? Because beyond that, I don't know a ton of people. I'm just kind of getting started with this. And so I remember saying, Lisa Sequist at Mass General Hospital, she would never be. So I would not even bother calling her because she's like, she's not going to be on my show. But over time, it just sort of, because I started building credibility just by having these. And it wasn't because they were famous. I wasn't looking for the most famous people. I was just looking for interesting people.
Yes.
And because there are some famous people that have not been on my show, but I had Narges Flores, who's at Dana-Farber. And at the time, she was at the University of Wisconsin. And I just reached out to her because she's from Venezuela. She seemed like a really interesting person. I thought that would be a great story. And it was a great story. She's amazing. She's brilliant. She's just brilliant. And then through her, then she introduced me to this person. And it just kind of word of mouth, and people started, introduced me to different people. Now I'm to the point where it feels like, because I'm not looking to find the most famous people. I'm just trying to find people that I think have a diverse story to tell. And I keep track of women versus men. It's like 50-50, literally. I'm very intentional about picking the people who represent very older, younger, post-grad. I've had postdocs on my show. So it's really about kind of a lot of diversity of voices. And so, but I'll tell you one of the interesting ones. So you're in Ohio, I think, right, Dave?
Yeah, I'm in Columbus. I moved here 3 years ago from Texas.
Okay, so I'll tell you my David Carbone story, okay?
Okay.
So David Carbone, for those of you who don't know, he runs the thoracic program at Ohio State. So he was one of those people that is just totally intimidating, because he's like, his father was like a brilliant oncologist, and they actually, I think they named the University of Wisconsin Cancer Center after his dad. So he is famous, right? And I'm sure you know, because you live in Columbus, you know how famous David Carbone is. So I was introduced to David, and he couldn't have been nicer. And now I'm friends with his wife. I was in Singapore at the World Lung Conference, and his wife is texting me saying, Dave, you got to come over to the Marriott and let's have, for a Singapore sling. And I was like, it's just so funny. So he invited me to come to Ohio to the Breath of Hope. I spoke there last year. I feel like I'm very friendly with David. I see him at the conferences. We always say hello. But his story was so interesting because everyone knows his resume. You can look at his resume and say, well, when he was a kid, he wanted to be a mechanical engineer. And he used to take apart like transistor radios and put them back together again, because he was just so interested in that. And he said, when he went to medical school, it was boring because it was all memorization. And I think he's a hands-on person. He's a carpenter. He's just a fascinating human. And so that's what I love about my show, is that it's not shining light on David Carbone because of the actual work or research. We talk about that, but it's really about the person behind it. And when you know that person, I believe in serendipity, because I believe that people who will want to go see Dr. Carbone and not be intimidated and feel like he's just a normal guy. He's a very nice person.
Yes, I have the utmost respect. Just recently have met him and his wife. Of course, his wife is very involved with nurses, Oncology Nurses Society as well, and the Breath of Hope, as you mentioned. And I don't know them as well as you have. I've been here 3 years, but I have the utmost respect. Brilliant mind, but as you say, very approachable and down to earth. And so that's interesting. So I would encourage the audience there to go check out that episode. Do you remember what year you interviewed him? If someone was to kind of scroll back and listen to the David Carbone, I'm sure they can just search for it and find it.
Yeah, I would say it was either 21 or 22.
Okay.
I don't remember, but
yes. And I would highly recommend our audience to go back and to listen to those. I have people come to me all the time who are in medical device and they want to get into specialty oncology. And I think a lot of those episodes are going to be extraordinary for our audience who are wanting to get into this, and they can see the patient, see the provider. Sometimes the provider is a patient, right? So sometimes, we have these stories where the leader also is a cancer survivor. Dave, can you take us back to your story about how you were treated? You said back then it was just chemotherapy. How do you remember how many rounds, or was it just surgery? It was just surgery for you? You had no chemo, just surgery?
I did not have chemo. It was the lobectomy, which is a major surgery to remove half of my left lung.
Wow.
So, it's a week in the hospital. It's a 6-hour surgery. It's a very complex surgery. But again, to me, it's like, I'm here. So it's a life of gratitude, because, but it's not for people who want to share their voice and become an advocate. I finally came to the decision, Dave, that it's not a contest of whose cancer is worse, right? It's like If you get a phone call from your doctor that says you have cancer, we have to take care of it. I've experienced that. Just like someone who's stage 4 experienced that. Now, I don't have stage 4, and I'm grateful that I don't have stage 4. I have a lot of friends who are stage 4, whether they have KRAS or they have ALK positive or whatever. I have a lot of friends who are currently in treatment, and I have great empathy for them. And so we can all, whatever the case, we can all have empathy for those who are fighting for their lives right now, but also grateful that they have access to treatments now that are available because of the innovations that have taken place. You know, I had another, it was Charo Agarwal at University of Pennsylvania, my alma mater. And I interviewed her on my show, and she said, I never really thought about this, but now that I think about it, it really is amazing that I can actually, I get great joy from being able to call a patient and say, I have great news. Calling a stage 4 lung cancer patient saying you have great news. It sounds kind of weird, but it's like, I have a treatment for you. You're ALK positive. I have a treatment for you that you can take a pill once a day. Like, mind-blowing to me.
Yes.
You know?
So you've come such a long way. Can you tell us, are there any medications or any breakthroughs or anything that has been exciting? The thing about lung cancer is no lung cancer patient is the same. There's such a variance of genetic drivers and mutations, and just also the diagnostic. All these companies from your, Garnet Foundation, Tempus, Caris, just so many, and a lot of others as well that are gaining closer and closer, more precise insights genetically of the makeup of that cancer patient. It's helping the treatments become more and more precise as well and innovative. Are there any treatments or anything that's been interesting to you in the last, as you've been interviewing all these thought leaders, that has been fascinating for you to listen and hear about?
Oh, there's so many, but I think the point that you're making is really important in lung cancer, is that biomarker testing, where you're actually getting a sample, a biopsy of a tumor, and like doing genetic testing. You mentioned Foundation and Guardant and all these other companies who are doing these tests, or they're done in-house at hospitals, to find out if there is a driver, a mutation. It's a identified mutation. I think there's like 10 or 11 or something mutations now in lung cancer that have a targeted therapy. So it's not a chemotherapy. It's literally targeted to that particular mutation. So I mentioned ALK positive. So or EGFR, right? So you have these treatments where if you are eligible, if you have identifiable marker, then you get a treatment that's not going to just devastate your body. It's just going to it's going to kill the cancer, but it's not going to have it has side effects, but it's not going to have the effect like a chemotherapy where you just sort of blast the body, right? And so to me, that's so exciting. And now it's not everybody has a driver. Like I didn't have a driver, but for those who do, I've heard doctors say, well, I'm just going to uncover every stone. And so even if it turns out that you don't have that, at least we tried. Yes. And I think the big thing for me, Dave, is that there was a study done, I think of the Journal of Clinical Oncology, that it said like 64% of patients who are eligible for precision medicine treatment are not getting access to it. And I think that's the biggest. I think all the pharma companies are concerned about this, because we have these targeted treatments and including J&J, but it's but if people don't have access to it, or they fall through the cracks, or they're not getting biomarker tests, or they don't get the results, or they start chemo before the results, or there's all kinds of complexity to why that's happening. But I think that's really one of the things that really motivates me is to continue talking about the importance of these biomarker testing to make sure that patients who do have a marker that they get access to this treatment, because it's going to improve outcomes.
Yes, and that was part of my story. Is I I was in the nonprofit industry 8 years ago. I thought, I want to do something else. I want to be able to be a better provider. Someday get married. I didn't get married till I was years later, until I was 40, actually. And now I have 3 kids, and but I wanted to make a difference. And so I got into the diagnostic space as far as like sleep apnea and insomnia, mobile cardiac telemetry. And then I started getting recruited with these companies that were doing these broad, next generation sequencing. And it was fascinating to me to understand the uniqueness of every single cancer patient. And I think that's an area too, for those who are wanting to get into a professional standpoint, to consider that there's a lot of innovation in this and in that area as well. And also the treatment side, because they collaborate. There's often what is called companion diagnostics, where in order for there to be an FDA approved treatment and to go quickly to get the approvals with the NCCN guidelines, there needs to be an accurate test, right? And so these companies will collaborate together. And even at the local level, sometimes there is, a meeting of reps. Now, not going in and they can't sell together, but there's at least a respect towards one another, that we both can do our part to make sure that the patient is getting what is best, the most accurate and the most precise, if there is a targeted therapy available. Dave, you graduated from what has been ranked many times the most prestigious business school, the Wharton School. It's a number of rankings, number one. You went into finance. There are people who have a business background, but they are intrigued. They rather not be in finance, and maybe they're kind of interested into pharmaceutical, commercial, the commercial side. They're not going to be physicians. They're not going to be pharmacists. There's a lot that goes in. How can someone, from your perspective, how can someone use why is business important to this industry? Can you tell us a little bit about that for those considering to break in? Because you're a businessman. You have that background.
Well, it's interesting, Dave, is that, I have a finance degree from Wharton, but I've been in business development my whole career, really. And for me, it's about relationships. You mentioned the work I do with pharmaceutical companies. I have amazing relationships at the highest level of several of the big pharmaceutical companies. And I think my business background it helps me sort of understand the process of the industry, or the sort of the commercialization, as I mentioned earlier, the ecosystem in oncology of how does a pharmaceutical company bring a drug to market, right? And it requires an extremely large amount of investment, as you know. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that. I think they don't realize that most of the drugs that go through, I've had recently several of my friends who work at different pharma companies who had taken drugs to the phase 3 trials, and they didn't meet their endpoints, which means they might have just spent $1 billion on a compound that just didn't pan out. It didn't work. So literally, that's the end of the line a lot of times for these products. And so understanding the business of the pharmaceutical industry is part of what I try to bring an empathy to understanding about. It's not that big bad pharma. It's not. Yes, there's some bad actors every once in a while. We all know that.
Yes.
But all the people that I know that work in pharma, all of them, the ones that I want to know, I know tons of people at J&J. I love my friends at J&J. There's a culture there that's special. And the people that I know, they do think of the patient. They do care. They're not there just to make a paycheck. They're there because they want to make it to the point you just made. Getting involved with medical sales, whether it's a device or diagnostics or a treatment, medicines, you're making a difference. It's part of how I talk when I give talks. It's like, no matter what your role is, you're not a doctor, you're not a clinician, but you're helping by bringing treatments to patients. So you can think about the business part of it, but also think about the relationship part of it. And that's really probably why you're successful at what you do, Dave, is that if you listen to my podcast, you listen to David Carbone or Misty Shields or Mike Caligiuri or Alicia Sequist or Nargis Flores, there's 100 people, 105 people. The relationship that you build with these people, you're in it together because they're just, you wouldn't believe how, well, you know how committed these people are.
Yes.
These people give their lives. Jeff Oxnard at Boston Medical Center. It's like these people, like, they give their lives to medicine. And so I don't know how they find the time of the day to like go to conferences, keep up to date on NCCN guidelines, learn about the new treatments that are happening. Things are happening all the time.
It's so much.
How do they even have a life? But the relationships that you can build, I know people are medical liaisons or they're sales reps. They become friends. They're like friends and family to these oncologists. Like that's the depth of relationships I'm sure that you can speak to, Dave.
I love that.
It's not like a transaction. It's not a transactional business. It's relationship driven.
I like that you are reminding us of that. And I think you're exactly right. It's really caring about other people. And I think I've experienced the same thing as well. Before I got into this industry, there was skepticism and, a lot of people about big bad pharma and stuff. And sure, there's some things for people to be concerned about. But I'm like you, the people that I've met, we're talking about people leading entire divisions of oncology, brilliant minds at some of the largest pharmaceutical companies that I ever worked with. These people are extraordinary, one, passionate about the patients, but also their employees. They take care of their employees. They take care of the patients. They want to do what's well. And we forget the struggle it is that there's frequent drugs that are, billions of dollars go into, and they want to do things right. And those drugs fail, to get, the FDA approval. And, there's not a good patient outcome in the clinical trials, and they've invested, and they say, you know what, we're going to stop this. It's not going to work. And we forget that. We don't hear about that. But yet they are willing to do that along the line, they can build trust and they can find something that will be a breakthrough, even if it means that company takes a little bit of a small step back and reassess, and maybe then they can put energies into another treatment. This happens, many times these clinical trials, that's what it is. It's a trial that we're gaining information. And in their mind, its success is finding out the truth, even if the truth is not what we really want. And that allows us to move forward in the innovation to better care for these patients. Dave, we really have appreciated you being on this show. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal life? When you're not doing the podcast, what do you do for fun? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, so I've been married for 34 years, and my wife is my best friend, and we love spending time with our kids. I have 3 boys. We love to travel, and we love to see live concerts. So,
who's the best concert you've seen in the last year?
Our favorite, I think. Well, we went to Las Vegas to see. We went to the Sphere, which if you've never heard of it, you never know what I'm talking about. I've
seen pictures. It looks amazing.
It's the most amazing. That's the most amazing. We saw Dead and Company, which is the remaining people of the Grateful Dead and John Mayer. But the visual, it's off the charts. It's like this. It's just the lights, and it's just crazy. But our favorite, we like to travel, so we love Coldplay. So we saw Coldplay 2 years ago in Chicago at Soldier Field, and then we saw them last September at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California. And it was just amazing. And so we love to,
what a great opportunity.
Yeah. Well, we're at that point. We're at that point, Dave, where it's like we went to Ireland last year, or earlier this year. And so we're just continuing to travel. And, and take every opportunity. We go to Maine. We're just taking advantage of that because we're at the point now because our kids are older. But the great thing is, even though our kids are in their late 20s, like they still want to hang out with us, and that's a victory for us. And so we were just up at Booth Bay Harbor, and the boys came up for part of that. So I'm really grateful for that. So it's all about my family.
That is so good. Well, it sounds like you have an exciting life. You're making a difference. You're having fun. And sounds like a great family, and you're helping so many people. For those, thank you again for coming on. For those who want to follow you, want to get, and download your podcast, or maybe a pharmaceutical company, a leader wants to have you come speak. Tell us how they can get in touch with you.
Well, I'm very, very, very public online. So if you just Google my name, Dave Bjork, BJORK, or the Research Evangelist, you'll find me. But you can reach me at dave@davebjork.com. It's my email. Or just, like I said, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. It's pretty easy to find me. So, and I want to say, Dave, thank you for what you're doing as well. I think what I found is at the end of my show, I always say to the guests, I said, thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you so much for what you do for the lung cancer community. And every single person says, Dave, thank you for what you do. And so think of that as well, Dave. Thank you for what you do, and think of the fact that you and I are not clinicians. We're not saving lives, but I've had people on my show, Misty Shields at Indiana University, who said, I had a resident at Indiana who came to her, who reached out to her and said, I heard your podcast on the Research Evangelist, and it changed my life because it made me want to go into oncology because I was struggling with which area I wanted to focus on. But hearing your story about how you lost your dad to small cell lung cancer when you were 15 years old, and how that inspired you, your story inspired me. And so I want you to think about that as well, because you are making a difference, because just by sharing things that you share, you can have an impact on people as well. So thank you for what you do, Dave.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. Well, I hope to stay in touch, and thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you.